Thank you, Sean. I'm so glad you led that last song there. I love that song. Yeah, I know. Yeah, that is a great song. It actually is. But it cannot be improved upon. It's all right, Revelation chapter 12. We'll get a running start back through things tonight. Last week we started in chapter 12 to get to the edge of 13, which is where we will spend our time tonight, maybe edge into 14 a little bit, though there may be doubters in the room. But anyways, chapter 12, remember, kind of is a pivot point in the book. Up to this point, the book's been kind of controlled by two cycles of 7. One is where John gets to see the throne room of heaven. God holds out a 7-sealed scroll. Who is worthy to basically take the mind and the will of God and know it and execute it. And there's a Lamb to whom all authority has been given who is able. And he opens the 7 seals, and it kind of reveals God's, part of God's purposes in history, which involves this conflict between his people and the world, in which his people are often abused, if not killed. And so at one point in the seals, as God's work in the world is being revealed, how long, O Lord, till you avenge us? In which, basically the rest of the seals is eventually I will. And that leads to the 7 trumpets, kind of warnings to the world to quit treating God's people this way or else. That culminate in the second coming, at least that is how I take the 7th trumpet. Hard not to do it with some of what's said there. And so the ultimate answer is God will come back and the world will be punished for what it's done to God's people. And so basically being assured that's going to happen, part of what happens in chapter 12, the pivot is that Wizard of Oz moment. When God says, okay, I'm going to deal with it. What happens on earth is going to be dealt with. But why are things the way that they are? Get my subject-verb agreement straight there. Why are things the way they are? And that's where he pulls back the curtain, and it's far, far bigger than just people on earth are mean to each other. And there's hate, and there's violence, and there's war, and the strong prey on the weak, and so forth. It's part of a larger war in heaven. What happens in the unseen realm affects the seen world that we experience, and vice versa. What happens in the seen realm affects the unseen realm, and both parts are just as real. We think only the material of the seen is the real, and it's really hard for us to accept the principalities and powers and authorities, as Paul calls them, out there and doing things. Even though everything from the visions of the Old Testament to Paul of the New Testament says that's there, and that's real. And so in chapter 12, we meet the deeper reality, and it is a reality of what's going on and what we are caught up in, and that is that there is a war in heaven. We're not told how the war got started. Hey, Earl, I think that door's locked. Can you? Thank you. Catch Jeremy there. Yeah, he checks out. You can let him in. But we're not told when or how the war starts. Satan's already fallen when he shows up in chapter 3. That's why he's tempting Adam and Eve. Bible doesn't go back that far, and part of what Revelation is reminding us as well, remember, with the 7 thunders John couldn't write about, there's more going on than we know even still, and we have to live with that. Don't assume that we can fully account for everything or we know everything. We don't. There's more to the story even still. So the dragon is the image for Satan, and he's fearsome, right? And he's meant to counterfeit God. That's what his aspirations are. What part of his imagery kind of is meant to point us in that way? In what way does he imitate God? Yeah, he wears crowns, which is a claim to rulership and authority. And what else? What's the other part of the way John describes him? Well, okay, that's the power, but you can have authority without claiming to be deity, though often they do go alike because people with a lot of power get big in their britches. But even more than the horns, it's the 7 heads. To whom does the number 7 belong? God. Yeah. The only time you and I, human beings, think about this throughout the Bible, the only time you and I humans ever get to do something with the number 7 is if it's oriented towards God. That's just how it works. And so, yes, he mimics God with the 7 heads, and every head gets its diadem, its ruling crown. And he comes and he attacks the woman. He attacks the woman, which represents the people of God, all times, all places. He wants to destroy the woman's child, which is the Messiah. The people, through the people of God, actually the Messiah comes into the world. And he wants to destroy that child. Remember, we talked a little bit last week about how the fact that the dragon wants to destroy the Son of God very much plays out on earth in everything from Herod trying to kill baby Jesus to the fact that the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders, with Pilate's help, in one sense, succeeded. Except that it turns out you can't kill him, because what happens after he's put to death finally, at the right time and place? God raises him. Just like the two witnesses, remember in chapter 11, if you're one of God's people doing God's work, you cannot ultimately be killed. And Jesus himself is the down payment on that. Here's where I do want to pick up in chapter 12. One thing we did not get to from last week. One of the things I've been mentioning from time to time this quarter is how much there's a consistency in the Apostle John's thought, understanding, and what he's doing between the Gospel, Revelation, and 1 John. They just do it in different idioms, different ways of talking about it. When you go back to chapter 12, starting in verse 7, where this war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. Notice it doesn't say that Michael and the angels are what defeated them. It's just past tense. All of a sudden he's defeated. You're not actually told explicitly there how, because it wasn't the angels who defeated them. And we'll come back to that in a sec. And the great dragon in his defeat, verse 9, was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world, thrown down to earth. His angels were thrown down with him. I want you to notice, Revelation is kind of past tense, kind of a passive. He's just defeated. John chapter 12, again, words of Jesus that are uniquely and only recorded in John. I want you to notice in John chapter 12 how John records uniquely among all the Gospels. Jesus records his impending death. And in this part of the story, we are literally almost to the Last Supper. Chapter 13 on starts the Last Supper. The final speeches of Jesus. We are literally, the way John tells the story, at the end of Jesus before he goes into the last night in the crucifixion, okay? And so literally at the cusp of the Last Supper and his final speeches and his crucifixion, look what Jesus says to it. Verse 27, now my soul is troubled. Jesus was actually, we think Jesus just kind of, was okay with the cross, it's my destiny. No, he was human too. And nobody, even if you're committed to obeying God, knowing that that's what awaits you, nobody sits there and says, well, it's no big deal. I get raised in 3 days. We mistake that sometimes. In his humanity, he dreaded it every bit as much as you or I would if we were in his shoes. Fully committed to do God's word, never any hint that he's not going to do it and not going to obey the Father's intentions for him. But it wasn't any easier than, for you or I if we were in his shoes. Now my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? But for this purpose I've come to this hour. This is why I came into the world. It's really weighing on me, these final hours, but I'm committed to it. And notice what he says next in verse 28. So Father, glorify your name. And then a voice came from heaven. I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. And the crowd that stood there and heard it said it had thundered. And others said it's an angel speaking to him. And Jesus answered, this voice has come for your sake, not mine. Notice what he says next now, though. Now is the judgment of this world. Now will the ruler of this world be cast out. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. And he said this to show what kind of death he was going to die. And that's enough for our purposes. But notice what he says, how he depicts the immediate or the impending crucifixion. We always focus on that's how our sins are forgiven, yes. But John, because John works on kind of almost a cosmic scale as much as he does just an earthly scale. Notice how he has, or reminds us, Jesus also saw it. It wasn't just for forgiveness of human sin. What's about to happen? The devil's about to be defeated in what I'm doing. It's more than just the forgiveness of human sin. This is the means by which the devil, the dragon, is dealt his final blow. Even Michael and the angels can't finally resist this being who has the 10 horns, immense power. The devil.
So you're saying this is chronological too? when that happens, is that when the devil gets thrown down?
I think it's what Jesus is hinting at, that is the point at which it is clear that Satan is defeated. And again, I think we want to be careful with Revelation's imagery, that not necessarily literally some sort of casting, down. But the point is, again, the World War II analogy works so well. D-Day and the success of the D-Day invasion marks the end of any hope Germany has to actually conquer Europe. Now, again, months will go on, nearly another year until VE Day, just like we continue in this world, and Satan, as Revelation 12 talks about, being cast down, he knows his time is short, and he's very angry. And what does he want to do with the time he has left? Realizing that he's defeated. What does he want to do? Revelation 12 says, make war on the woman's children. The church cannot be defeated as the church, but individually we can be harassed, persecuted, tempted to fall away in a moment of weakness because it makes our lives easier. And so he, just like the Germans were determined, even once it became clear they had no hope of winning the war, there would be no Third Reich for 1,000 years. What did they do instead? As they retreated, they burned it all down. And that's literally what Satan is, in a sense, doing with the time he has left. But yes, all that to say, just again, if you write in your Bible, Revelation 12, write John 12, where Jesus sees, and again, 1 John chapter 3, for this reason the Son of God appeared to destroy the works of the devil. John very much throughout his writing keeps almost a cosmic level of what this is about. It's not just about forgiveness of human sin, though that's accomplished. And that goes back to one of those seven thunders moments, that at the end of the day, what happened 2,000 plus years ago on a Judean hillside has implications that go beyond, I think, full human comprehension. Just like the seven thunders, there's more there. We forget so because we're just so focused on our own individual salvations that, as Jesus says, Father, glorify thy name. This is very much about God being glorified over against not just our own failures, but over against satanic rebellion itself. There is a big story going on here, and we are just part of it. So, yes, sir.
At that point, Satan is out of God's presence?
I don't know, Earl. I don't know how to nail that down.
Is he still alive?
Yeah, the bottom line is, rather than chasing, exactly, how it all works, what the actual terms and conditions that apply are. It's just understanding really the bottom line is his focus is on us and destroying us. So how does he do that? Chapter 13. We just started getting to chapter 13. How does he make war on the woman's children in the time he has left? And he does it through two other beasts that he summons. The first beast comes from the sea, which is an Old Testament image, among other things, for just kind of the chaos of human history. Out of the Sturm und Drang of human history come occasional political powers that transcend a local place and almost seem to become a world, a global empire, and so in the book of Daniel, the beasts in Daniel were not, just local small kingdoms, little tribal warlords with their, 50 square miles of influence. The beasts in Daniel were what they were, they were kind of worldwide in implication. The Assyrian Empire and the Babylonian Empire, and then, you have the Greek Empire and the Persian Empire and the Roman Empire, things that were, beyond local warlords, things, world powers. And so Satan does it, and in their own day, for the Christians who were receiving this book, who was it? It was the Roman Empire. It does have a historical, first limit, and so it was the Roman Empire.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, Richard. Yeah.
And it's got a little bit off the subject.
Okay.
As Satan takes over Earth, his plan of operation is to defeat us by ourselves, within ourselves.
That's one option. That's one way he can do it.
Because there's three types of sins, and that comes from us.
Right.
It doesn't come from him.
Right.
He just makes it beautiful.
Sure. But part of what Revelation is also reminding us is, and remember, this is originally received by Christians in the seven churches of Asia who are being persecuted.
Yeah.
And we forget sometimes that literally in the opposition that the world itself casts up to us, that is also a satanic attempt to hurt us. to destroy us. And because the thing is, it's not just the temptations from within, it's if I can discourage them or make them fearful. And that's why later on I begin to understand why later on in the book of Revelation, when he's listing who goes in, when who goes in the lake of fire is given, the first in that list is the cowardly. Christian, and in the context of Revelation, what he's talking about is Christians who did not persevere unto death if necessary. Whereas Jesus faced the cross boldly because that was the will of God. Satan can get some of us, not because I'm particularly interested in being wicked, but because I'll deny his name, if need be, to save my job, save my life, whatever. And that's Revelation's point. That kind of pressure that comes from the world, whether it's from the government, whether it comes from state religion, as we get into this book, other ways that these types of ideas work. In our day and place, whether it's pressure from HR, pressure from the culture. If you want to have certain jobs, have in certain positions, be part of certain things, then you have to participate in the world in certain ways. I think most men recognize the limitations on their career when you don't participate in happy hour if you're in the corporate world, right? I mean, there's a cost to be paid, and that's just the negative side of it, where you don't participate. Whereas more and more we live in a world which is more and more resembling this, which is it's not a matter of just there or no you don't that you won't participate. It's if you don't participate with us, what? You're out. If you will not affirm, if you will not participate, if you will not celebrate, you're out.
Or not out, but you won't get what these people get, the chance
Sure,
to
sure,
promote yourself.
sure. But what we're going to see in chapter 13, and that's one of the chief ways the beast works, is you don't get to participate with everybody else, even the bare necessities of life in some cases. Even if we don't kill you, we so put you on the margins you can't make a living for your family. That's not a new risk. That's in chapter 13 of this book. Whoever gets the mark does not get the mark of the beast cannot buy or sell. Nothing new about this. 2,000-year-old problem. Because the fact of the matter is far more Christians over the centuries have compromised themselves not under fear of death, but over fear of missing out. Literally. Stop and think about that. Over fear of missing out. Because the fact of the matter is most Christians in human history have rarely faced the, renounce Jesus or die moment. That just, that has happened for a handful, but that's just, even in ancient, older history, that wasn't that common. But what was far more common, missing out, ostracization, penalization, not being able to be a full participant in society in some way, shape, or form. It's powerful. I mean, we talk to teenagers about peer pressure. Let's be honest, as adults, we're no different. That doesn't change just because, you're 45. If you grow in maturity and wisdom, but I think plenty of adults, have not yet learned to, let go of the fear of man. Chapter 13. So I saw a beast rising out of the sea, 10 horns and 7 heads. Oh, what does he look like? He looks like the dragon. He looks like the dragon. 10 horns, 7 heads, 10 diadems on his horns, blasphemous names on his head. The earthly counterpart of the dragon is the same type of thing. He makes divine claims, aspires to divinity. Most empires in human history claimed their kings were divine and it had some sort of state religion, right? Ancient Egypt, their pharaohs were gods. Roman Empire, Caesars, yeah. And ironically, the real change that happened literally in John's time was in the Roman Empire, the cult of the emperor was for dead emperors. It was one of those, kind of like, Professor Emeritus. Once you died, they deified you. What happened in John's own lifetime was that changed. And Domitian, ironically, who was the emperor at the time Revelation was written, was the first emperor to actually claim divinity status while still alive, which further heightened the pressure on Christians in some parts of the empire. Anyway, so yeah, so government power, the means by which God has or Satan has often tried to hurt God's people is with official state power, the government. And to the dragon, the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. And one of his heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worshiped the dragon, for he has given authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who can fight against it?" Every patriotic empire who has always believed we will never fall, and the citizens who share that belief. In Babylon, what did it look like? Daniel chapter 4, remember the story? Nebuchadnezzar's walking along, and what does he say?
I have built all of this.
Yeah, is this not Babylon? Babylon the great that I have built. Can't imagine the world without Babylon. Not what look at this place. Lasted less than a few more decades. You know, to the Roman Empire, you realize they call it the eternal city for a reason. Because what was the idea? A world without Rome? Not possible, not feasible. Every generation, especially the citizens of an empire, well, again, let the reader understand, every citizen of an empire has a hard time believing that the world could exist without their empire. What would the world could not exist without the stability of the American order and the American dollar, the American military giving peace and justice and keeping those bad countries under, they're not communists anymore, so we have to find other kinds that kind of make the bad guy and stand up to. But we think about it. We literally don't think that the world could exist without us. What is that? That's what it looks like today. That's the mindset that Revelation is describing. And you know what the warning of Revelation is? We're not the first to have thought this. Every beast thinks this. Nebuchadnezzar thought it. Rome thought it. We think it. And by the way, here's the thing that we've really got to get into, and this is such a fine line between, I'm thankful for the country and the blessings, but, very big but, because we don't often get the but in the church very much. If your era looks like a beast, and talks like a beast, and acts like a beast, guess what you are? You're the beast. And as we keep on going through these later chapters, and as the beast continues to be described and fleshed out, you have to look in the mirror and admit, where we live now is the modern version of the beast.
And it was founded, the founding fathers based it on religion and on God,
Well,
trust in God.
and paradoxically on the Greeks and the Romans before us, intentionally. Again, we're not the first nation to follow an eagle. They said, who is like the beast and who can fight against it? Verse 5, and the beast was given a mouth, uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for, there's our number again, for 42 months. In what way, going back to chapter 11, in what way can the temple courtyard be trampled for 42 months? In what way can the people of God be abused for a time? This is one way. Hostile governments, hostile cultures that turn on the people of God. That's one way. And so for 42 months, the beast is allowed to utter haughty and blasphemous words. What do haughty and blasphemous words look like? What do they look like today? Let's keep on looking in the mirror. A beast that utters haughty and blasphemous words. What do they look like today? Say again? Okay, so yeah, there's no male or female. And is that an official government position right now? The correct answer is, yeah, absolutely. What else?
No fault divorce.
No fault divorce. What else?
Just mentioning that the world was created in 7 days, which you laughed at for
That's right. Yeah, the fundamental assumption is there is no God, by default. My body, my choice. We get the point. Blasphemous. Haughty words are spoken. But notice, it was allowed to exercise authority. It's real. It has power. It has 10 horns. For 42 months. It opens its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints. And notice what it says next now. And God spared them because they were righteous people who followed God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength. Is that what it says? What does it say? To overcome, to conquer them. Because part of what this book is telling us is the God honest truth. That God is not always going to ride just in the nick of time in to save his people in this life. He didn't do it for Jesus, and if you live the Jesus-shaped life, you will have a Jesus-shaped life. And so God is going to allow the authority of the beast to prevail sometimes. And again, remember, what's this part of the book all about? It's about answering the question of the souls under the altar. How long, O Lord? And he won't answer the how long, but he's trying to get us to understand a little bit more about what he's up to. And he's admitting, God is honest with us, that sometimes he will allow the beast a 42-month, a season, to trample his people. And authority was given it over every tribe, people, language, and nation. Again, we're not talking about local warlords. We're talking about global civilizations. and all who dwell on the earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. And that's how the ESV translates it. If you have the King James, maybe the New King James, it reads a little bit differently, but they have a little bit of a different reading there. Verse 8, yeah. What's the alternative reading if somebody's got a different one?
It reads, and all who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life, the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world.
There we go. And that's, I'm guessing, New King James, Sean?
New King James.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody have something like that? What's the difference? Anybody pick up on it? What's the difference? There's a phrase that moves. Maybe. There's a phrase that moves. The what now? Okay, there you go. Yeah. The phrase before the foundation of the world or some sort of equivalent moves, depending on your translation. Some put it as the Lamb slain before the foundation of the world. Others whose names are written in the book of life before the foundation of the world. And so what do we do with that? Believe it or not, after looking at this, I think, and I'm not dogmatic about this, Greek grammar is quirky. That's why there's two standard translations for this. But the ESV and the others who follow it, I think the New American Standard does something similar, are probably correct. And part of the reason is that this same phraseology happens elsewhere in which it's clear. Chapter 17, verse 8, a little bit later on. The beast that you saw that was and is not and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. The dwellers on earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. There it is. Same phrase. And there, because of the way it's written both in Greek and just in the context, it's pretty clear that the phrase from the foundation of the world goes with book of life, not with lamb slain. I think you can make lamb slain from the foundation of the world work. I mean, the idea is just God always had a plan. Right, and it was so certain to be accomplished, because we do see this elsewhere in the Bible, where the Bible will sometimes talk about future events, what are future events from the time it's spoken or written, in past tense, because it's so certain that God will accomplish His purpose. The Bible does do that sometimes, but especially with 17:8 kind of pushing us a little bit, the idea seems to be the book of life from the foundation of the world. And so what do you do with this? When you go back and look at it, two observations. Number one, the sense may just be that the book of life itself is ancient, that God has always had, kind of an ancient book. Even if it does mean more precisely that the names are written from the foundation of the world, it does not mean Calvinist predestination. Here's why. Because the Calvinists make a huge mistake. What the Calvinists do is they solve the fundamental mystery of how God runs the world by taking the easy way out of it. They take what should be a both and turn it into an either or. In other words, what the Bible does clearly teach, no matter how you want to slice out the details, what the Bible clearly teaches is divine sovereignty and foreknowledge. God knows the future. The book of Isaiah is emphatic about that. That's part of how I'm God and not an idol. The idols can't do what I do. I'll tell you by name people before they're even born. I can do that. That's part of what makes me God. He does have foreknowledge, and there is a predetermined, He will win. He could tell the serpent back in the garden, I'll crush your head. Do what you will. I'll crush your head. And yet free will is also equally real, right? What Calvinists do is they make the mistake of saying, well, one's really got to be the real and the other's just an illusion. Because just in terms of logic, we human beings, how do you reconcile knowing the future without predetermining it in a way that makes people morally innocent? But the reality is, if you're God playing by a whole different level of rules and reality above and beyond humans, why can't He do both? Why can't He know with certainty from the beginning? I mean, He knew Jesus was going to come into the world, He was going to die, He would be born in their hair. I mean, that's all, when Paul says He was born at the appointed time, at the right season. What makes it the right season? Well, God knew all, what was going to happen all the way through human history. And that's why He wanted to happen at that time under Pontius Pilate, or, crucified days of Pontius Pilate, born under Herod, Caesar Augustus. The Roman Empire would be the right time to do this. Didn't take away the moral culpability of anybody. I mean, did it take away Pilate's moral culpability? Or Judas's, because God had ordained that Jesus would die by crucifixion? No. But Calvinists make the mistake of saying, because I can't figure out how both can be true, one must be an illusion and one must be real. And they just pick the predestination side. Free will is an illusion. That's a mistake. If He is the true God, described in the Bible as deep darkness, a mystery that cannot be fathomed, seven thunders territory, why can't it be both? right? Why can't it be both? In fact, and just to show you, even within the context of this book, that the book of life, still, that your choices and mine still have an impact on whether my name's actually in the book of life or not. Go with me, back with me to chapter 3. Book of life actually pops up a number of places in the book of Revelation. Let me finish this thought real quick, Earl. Chapter 3, verse 5. Chapter 3, verse 5, there in the middle of his letter to Sardis. Verse 3. Remember what you have received and heard. Keep it and repent. Sure sounds like he's asking them to make a choice, right? Make a choice, you Christians in the church of Sardis. Repent. If you will not wake up, I will come like a thief. You will not know at what hour I will come against you. Yet you still have a few names in Sardis, people who have not soiled their garments, and they will walk with me in white, for they are worthy. The one who conquers will be clothed thus in white garments, and I will never blot his name out of the... Sure sounds to me like these people's choices have a real implication on whether their name's going to be in that book or wiped out of that book. It's not either or, it's both and, folks. He's God, and he can have it both ways, even if you and I cannot reconcile it. Remember, ultimately, the way God put Job in his place. You can't even begin to explain how I made the world. You really think you therefore understand how I run the world? Think about it, because that's the dynamic there in Job 38 and following, right? Job wants to know why. Why has God allowed this to happen to you? How does God run the world? And God's first response to Job is, if you can't tell me how I did it, you're sure not going to get how I run it. So, yes, sir, Earl.
Ezekiel was in the valley of bones, I can raise these bones.
Yeah, yeah.
To worship me.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And it is ironic that one of the things, again, Isaiah 40 to 48, to me, one of the most important sections of the Bible, one we rarely study, let alone preach or talk about. Note to self. But Isaiah 40 to 48 is really, even more than Genesis, one of the most stunning places in all the Bible where God just really says, who is like me? To what would you compare me? You can't, there is no fully adequate analogy to even begin to grasp the enormity of who and what I am. Yeah, a tremendous section of Scripture, even more than Genesis. I think there, because ironically, the doctrine of creation slides in there some in those chapters, because God uses that as one of his calling cards. But his greatest is, I know the future. I know the future with utter certainty. I can name people before their great-great-grandparents have even been conceived and tell you his name and what he's going to do. It's there. I mean, the reality is, God does know have that level and beyond knowledge of the future. He does. Yeah, I mean, that's right, Jeremiah. In the womb you named me. The psalmist. In the days. My days are in your book. My days are in your book. I don't know. I know what the first date is on my tombstone. I don't know what the last one is. But God does already. God knows what the last date is for me and for you. And you say, well, what happens if I choose this, force God's hand and choose suicide? As though God wouldn't have known that too. I mean, you're not going to beat God at this game, folks. So, anyways, is that good? That makes sense? Yeah. Again, I think one of the real problems with Calvinism is, again, they chose to take the easy way out. Ironically, it's almost a pagan thing. I must force God into a comprehensible framework. So I'll give sovereignty, because I want to keep God as God. So God's sovereignty and foreknowledge and everything, and free will is what's an illusion. Rather than so it turns it into an either or. You can have one or the other. You can't have both. And again, God's saying, why not? Don't you understand who you're dealing with? Of course I can. Yeah. The Calvinists thought too hard, and that's where they really went wrong. They tried to make God understandable. If you can fully understand God, he's not God anymore. And by the way, that includes the mystery of suffering and evil in our lives. We desperately want to understand why. If you can understand all the whys of your life, your God is too small. You're worshiping a counterfeit. Speaking of counterfeits, back to chapter 13. Anything else to on that before we move on? Is that good? We good? Okay. That's that was an interesting phrase. I appreciate. I had not paid enough attention to that. All right. So again, to the beast, those on earth will be given into his hand for a while. He has authority, and he will abuse it. But he will be worshipped by the world in the meantime. Everyone whose name is... verse 9. So here's the warning. This is really important. Here's the warning. Here's the warning, verse 9. And because I want to go back and look at the words that God, Jesus, the angel, John use here. They come from Jeremiah, and the context matters. But first, the warning. So if anyone has an ear, let him hear. Listen up. Whether you like it or not, this is how it is. If anyone is to be taken captive, the captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword he must be slain. Again, well, we've already seen he's not going to bail you out all the time. Sometimes he's going to let it happen to you. And so what does that mean? If God's will is for you to go captive, you go captive. If God's will is for you to be slain with a sword, then what? Then you die. And what's the last part of that warning? This is a call for what? 2 words, 2 crucial words. Endurance, hanging in there, no matter what, and faith. But here in the context, the right word, I think, to translate faith is not just faith in the sense of mentally knowing, okay, well, this is how the world works. Faith in the sense of trust. I don't understand why, but I'm going to stick with God anyways. I'm going to trust him. Say again? Yeah, that's right. That's right. And in that context, the whole point is by just trusting. Why God uses the Babylonians to defeat his people when they're even worse, that's God's business. Trust him anyways. Go back to the book of Jeremiah chapter 15. That's where this comes from. I want you to notice what in the full context it hints back to a little bit. And again, sobering, but the word of God that needs to be declared in its fullness. Jeremiah 15. And let's think back to a sec. When does Jeremiah live? What's going on in Jeremiah's lifetime? Speaking of the guy who God knew in the womb. The what, Earl? Yeah, he is God's color commentator as Jerusalem falls and is taken captive. He's there before, during, and after. He is God's color commentator, as I like to put it, to just kind of walk the people through it, You didn't listen to God for 1,000 years, so here we go, and I'm going to give you the blow by blow as it happens. Jeremiah 15, beginning of verse 1, the Lord said to me, though Moses and Samuel stood before me, yet my heart would not turn toward this people. Send them out of my sight and let them go. So that's pretty tall order. Moses used to be able to talk God destroying the people regularly. Go back and read Exodus and Numbers. Moses did it on multiple occasions. Don't destroy them, God. And what would God do? He'd listen. Well, this time he says, even if you had Moses and Samuel as a tag team, And when they ask you, well, where should we go? If God's abandoning us to destroy, well, what's going to happen to us? And you shall say to them, and here's our lines that John pulled. Those who are for pestilence to pestilence. Those who for sword to sword. Those who are for famine to famine. Those who are for captivity to captivity. Whatever happens to you, happens to you. Now keep in mind, who's he talking to? He's not talking to the world. Who's he talking to? He's talking to God's own people. God is talking to his own people. And what's he saying? This is going to happen to you. I'm not going to bail you out. Now, in the fullest context, why is it happening to them? It's happening to them because they did not repent. God has spent 1,000 years, give or take, sending prophets saying, you're not keeping the covenant, you're not keeping the covenant, you're not keeping the covenant. And so finally, after 1,000 years, God pulls the trigger. Verse 3, so I will appoint over them 4 kinds of destroyers, declares the Lord. Just like we've seen, oh, by the way, 4 kinds of destroyers. Wait a second. Have I seen 4 horsemen and 4 trumpets, different ways in which God does this kind of stuff? See how the Bible's just a handful of big ideas, just repeated with variation. It's a symphony, theme, and variation. His 4 destroyers, the sword to kill, the dogs to tear, the birds of the air, and the beasts of the earth to devour and destroy. And I will make them a horror to all the kingdoms of the earth because of what Manasseh, son of Hezekiah, king of Judah, did in Jerusalem. What did Manasseh do? Anybody remember? What was Manasseh in particular renowned for? Yeah. Well, yeah, among other things, yeah, that's fair. Manasseh's list was long and staggering, and it was bad. But the one that really lit God's fire, because lots of others have been idolatrous and built high places, but what was the one that just pushed God over the edge? Yeah, in fact, offered his sons. Book of Jeremiah will come back to this. They'll call it the Topheth, the place of Topheth. Book of Jeremiah itself will come back several times to the deep-rooted culture of child sacrifice. By the way, do we sacrifice children today in this country? Yeah. Absolutely we do. Absolutely. And it's kind of interesting, ironically, just in terms of, going back to fearing God above man. If God says the thing that really pushed me over the edge, and remember what he's saying, ultimately, the reason why I've had it with you, and I'm not going to change my mind, you get your dream team of prophets together. You're not going to talk me out of this now, is because Manasseh finally pushed me over the edge. Among all the many things Manasseh did, what was the thing that most angered God? Let the reader understand. Burn, yeah, there they burned them with fire. Today we do it with anesthesia and saline. In God's eyes, what's the difference? There is none. There is none. The womb that was meant to be a place of life has become a grave for millions upon tens of millions. And God knows. And by the way, I think I know the identity of some of those souls under the altar crying out, "How long, O Lord?" Keep reading. Verse 5, "Who will have pity on you, O Jerusalem? Who will grieve for you? Who will turn aside to ask about your welfare? You have rejected me, declares the Lord. You keep going backwards, so I have stretched out my hand against you and destroyed you. I am weary of relenting." God actually gets tired of being the nice guy sometimes. I'm tired of relenting. Another way of saying I'm tired of being merciful. I'm done with that. But here's the key verse in the full context for us and why we come here. And this is part of what takes us back to Revelation in just a moment. "I have winnowed them with a winnowing fork in the gates of the land. I have bereaved them. I have destroyed my people. They did not turn from their ways. I made their widows more in number than the sand of the seas." That's a stunning line, by the way, because what's that line come from? More numerous than the sand of the sea. But they've fallen so low that now, literally, instead of making your descendants as numerous as the sand of the seashore, it's your widows. The blessing is turned into a curse. Anyways, and that's enough for just kind of to describe the enormity of the judgment. But verse 7 is turning this key line. "I have winnowed them with a winnowing fork." What does that mean? What's God doing? He's punishing for sin, but what is he doing? Yeah. What is winnowing? We're not farmers anymore. Well, that's bellows. That's
separate the chaff from the seed.
It's a separation. It's a separation. Because the truth of the matter is, was every last individual Jew alive in Jeremiah's day wicked? No. Let's start with Jeremiah himself. And you could name Ezekiel, his contemporary. And you could name Daniel. And Shadrach. I mean, you realize these guys, Shadrach, Meshach, they're all alive. These are all guys alive together. Daniel knows of Jeremiah. He tells us so in his book. Ezekiel, etc. These guys, so yeah, they were around. But they were such a small minority. God says, "I'm done." But the winnowing, what's God doing? He's separating the wicked from the righteous. But how's he doing it? This is the key. This takes us back to Revelation. How's he doing it? In judgment and suffering for sin. That's how he separates those who will endure in the midst of God passing judgment over his people, and those who are, first of all, destroyed because they're wicked or destroyed because they lose heart. It's how God works in the world. And it's something we need to, in our quest for spiritual maturity, to accept and be more cognizant of. This is how God works. And so John points them back to Jeremiah. And says to the Christians, this is how it works. Now that helps us go back and even better understand the full context of Revelation. Because at the end of the day, Revelation is not just a vision of what's coming or how God works or what like that. Beginning of the book, what's it first and foremost? It's a message to who? 7 churches in Asia. And what for most of those churches does Jesus have to say to them? Repent or else. And so what is Jesus doing to his own people in a very real sense in the midst of their worldly sufferings? What's he doing? He is winnowing them. Those who have endurance and faith prevail and are winnowed. They're proven. These are my people of endurance and faith. And those who fall back into the world, lose heart, give into the fear of man, the loss of comfort, pleasure in life, if not loss of life itself, they're winnowed. They're not my people, really. When Jesus says, again, use Gospels idiom, anybody who loves father, mother, husband, wife, children, even his own life more than me is what? Not worthy of me. And the hard truth is suffering is one of the ways in which God winnows his people and finds out who's all in and who's just playing games as long as it's comfortable and the air conditioning's on Sunday morning. Comments, questions? Now the room's gotten deathly quiet. It does get better towards the end, I do promise. I mean, there's singing. There will be singing. There will be singing, but you have to get there first. Jesus' glory was through the cross, and so, and so to us. All right, so what's one of the ways then that this awful land beast, 6 minutes, this awful land beast does his work? Government and political power don't work alone. There's other kinds of power that work in human society, aren't there? I mean, we see it in our own world. In fact, in our own culture, what's one of the forms of, there's the political power of the government, but what's it often pushing on? But corporate power. Corporate power. We're talking about companies that are too big to fail, right? I mean, I remember back in U.S. history, back in the late 19th or 20th century, back in the last Gilded Age, the age of the robber barons, first the great railroad barons, and then came the great steel tycoons, and then the first real financial wizards in the early oil boom. And so you had Standard Oil, and you had J.P. Morgan with his financing world, and you had Andrew Carnegie with his steel, and so forth. And what happened was, you realized, I forget who it was, one of those men was so rich. Maybe it was J.P. Morgan. Yeah, he literally wrote a check to bail out the federal government. Yeah, I mean, we're starting to get back to it with these, Elon Musk with his $250 billion or whatever. But if you were to adjust Morgan's wealth for today, inflation, nobody today is still as wealthy as Morgan was. Staggering wealth. And so one of the things that happened in that era in our country was people like Teddy Roosevelt, the trust busting. The whole point was literally you had government power pushing on corporate power, economic power. And that still happens today, doesn't it? The government drags in CEOs to testify. We're going to regulate you. And the tech CEOs are quietly laughing, saying, yeah, good luck with that. Right? I mean, that's still how it works, right? How does certain types of power use other power in the world to accomplish their purposes? And so does the beast. And so he summons a land beast. And it had two horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. Now, what's the point of that? It doesn't look nearly as ugly or dangerous. In fact, two horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. It's disguised. It's cuddly on the surface, but it speaks like a dragon. It looks almost like, wait, I met a lamb in this book. Consistency of imagery. Who's the lamb? It looks moral. It looks righteous. It looks cuddly. But when you listen to it talk, you find out what it really is. And it's not Jesus. It's still the dragon underneath it. So sometimes the dragon comes at us in the fearsome guise of political power. The totalitarian, communist Russian Soviet Union government crashing down on dissidents. That happens sometimes. And sometimes it comes with a velvet glove over it. It comes looking like a lamb, even if it still speaks like a dragon. It's not nearly so dangerous, not nearly so threatening. So let's look a little bit more. And it exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and it makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose mortal wound was healed. The first era of the combining of different kinds of power for one real purpose is nothing new. For most of human history, I've couched this principally in economics, but for most of human history, it was actually a union of political power and what other kind of power? Religious power. And think about it this way. What got Jesus killed? It was an unholy union of political leaders like Pilate and religious leaders. And that's why for most of human history, it's so easy to forget how unique our country, our culture is with this freedom of religion. For most of human history, why have there always been wars of religion? Because what the government understood is what? The key to keeping my power is keeping people worshiping the way that doesn't threaten me. And so the Catholics have to kill the Protestants, and the Protestants have to kill the Catholics, and so forth. Because for most of human history, and that goes all the way back to, well, frankly, to even what in John's Gospel, the religious leaders admit at the end of chapter 11, the beginning of chapter 12, we're going to lose not just our religious power, we're going to lose our political power with the Romans if this guy keeps saying what he's saying and doing what he's doing. And so we have to get rid of him. For most of human history, it's been the unholy union of religious power coupled with state power for most of human history. And that's what Revelation depicts here first and foremost. And our world takes a little bit of a different form. We won't quite get to touch on it tonight because the bell's going to teach us. And yes, we did not get to chapter 14, duly noted. Anyways, and so let's read a little bit more though. So this beast performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven in front of people, and by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who are dwelling on the earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived, and it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak, and might cause those who did not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Oh, it's the counterfeit keeps on. Last time I saw somebody giving breath to an image, it was God giving his image, human beings, breath. It's counterfeiting all the way down. Again, the aspiration to replace God. Now here's the thing. In the ancient world, you literally did have fake religions that meant to impersonate God and work fake wonders and so forth. In the Roman Empire, they had mystery religions. They had idols that were literally, you get people high on the fumes, you burn some stuff, get people a little loopy in the temple between the mist and the fumes, and burn enough marijuana in the vicinity and people get a little loopy. And they would. We've actually, archaeologically, we found idols with little, they could make them with string and get people high, and you could trick them a little bit. Today, it takes a little bit of a different form. It's not a state religion anymore. It's corporate and technological power. Our magic is technology. And our technology causes us to worship the beast. Because our technology is our magic that makes lives comfortable and works. What do we even say? They work miracles down in the med center. You with me? We never really change. The forms just change. And how many people, in the name of what science has accomplished, and what they mean is not some sort of scientific speculation. What does the science accomplish? Science accomplishes medicine, technology, these kinds of things. We worship the beast because it makes God less plausible. But this little lamb speaking like a dragon shows up, and rather than just beating us into submission, it wows us with what it can do. And what do most of us do? We worship it. And that's where we'll stop for tonight. Our beast, one of our beasts is technology. Is exactly right. All right. See you next week, Lord willing. Absolutely.